What's up? Welcome back to the Matchbox. It's Dizzle. Was Adam gone last week too, or was that 2 weeks ago? Might have been last week. Regardless, I'm back in charge again, and we know things just go off the rails every time they give me the steering wheel. But
Buckle
I did
up.
do something clutch, and I invited one of our awesome coaches, Tyler Cloutier, onto the podcast to fill in for Adam and Dylan. I'm sure Tyler's knowledge is the equivalent of both of their knowledges combined. So
Obviously,
we have a full roster here. And then Caitlin is with us as usual. All right, we'll jump. Well, I don't know. Tyler, you've been on here before. Do you want to do a quick intro or no?
I was on an episode a while back, but yeah, I listen regularly, so I'm stoked to be here and hear more from Coach Caitlin.
All right. Are you saying that because Dylan and Adam won't talk over her, even though I'm usually the one that
we can hear from the smartest one on this podcast.
Whoa.
No pressure.
Wow, humbled enough.
Nice. We got this one from Taylor in Iowa. She says she really enjoys the pod and she's got a question. I'm traveling outside of the US for 2 weeks in mid-July, and my A event is mid-August. So she's going to be out of the country for 2 weeks, a month before her A race, which is Core 4 in Iowa. I have a pretty flexible availability and train about 10 to 15 hours a week, including cycling, lifting, running, and walking. On my trip, there will be lots of walking, and I'll have access to a hotel-type gym. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. So she lives it pretty open-ended as far as where we want to take this, but I think what she's asking, if I need to fill in the blank a little bit for her, is how can she optimize those 2 weeks, or what should she do during those 2 weeks so she doesn't lose fitness? And it sounds like
4 weeks, right? Didn't you say
yeah,
4
that's
weeks?
what she's going to be outside. She's going to be gone for 2 weeks. So she says she's going to be doing walking and gym. So I guess she's asking what can she do while she's on her trip to not lose fitness, but then also probably would be how can she use the, let's say, 4 weeks when she returns to prep for the race. It's probably 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah. Does that make sense? Core 4 is for context, Core 4, I did it last year. Core 4 is a 100-mile, kind of like a gravel race. There's a lot of pavement in it, but it's kind of like the rule of 3, and it's the same promoters as the rule of 3, where it's 100 miles, but it's kind of split up into 4 different types of road: pavement, gravel, single track, and B roads. Isn't that what they call, or MMRs is what Chase always calls them, but like minimum maintenance roads, which is kind of like you're riding through a grass field. I had never ridden on an MMR until I got to Core 4 last year, so that was a new experience. But it's basically like a gravel race with a lot of pavement is what you could say.
Okay. Caitlin, you want to go first?
As per usual, this question is so hard because there's so much of it depends. There's no blanket program for everyone. So I would love to be able to see her training, but my initial instinct would be to do something big because you have so much time. You're into a forced recovery week, essentially. It sounds like a lot of active recovery, just being walking on vacation. It's nice that you have the opportunity to maybe hit the gym in the morning. So like, again, doing like low maintenance 15 to 20 minute workouts in the morning just to get something in, and then you'll be walking throughout the day. So you're still staying active, which is good, but you're missing all that riding. So putting in whether it's a volume block, an intensity block, 2 weeks of big volume. Again, your training should be specific to your event. So at that point, it should sounds like, how long is this event?
100 miles. She says she's doing it on a 3-man team, so I don't know if that means they're splitting it up, or but I would say let's just assume she's doing the full distance, 100 miles.
yeah, then I would say maybe finagling your schedule to do 2 weeks of higher volume before you leave for that trip. So that way you can just allow your body to absorb those adaptations and come back and kind of be in more of a maintenance phase before your event.
Yeah, that's good. I didn't think about before. My brain didn't go to what she should be doing before she left for her trip. I mean, so you're saying like basically, like dig as deep of a hole as you probably can because you have plenty of time to recover from it. Like, when else do you have a 2-week forced recovery? Like, if I knew that I couldn't ride for 2 weeks, I'm gonna like put myself in the hole as deep as I can, and then you probably got, even if you overtrain a little bit, you're probably gonna recover from it.
Anytime I have an athlete who tells me they have this family vacation where they're not going to have the bike, or they have a work trip coming up, well, let's work backwards from that because that's going to be your recovery week.
Most of the athletes that I work with say, I have a family vacation coming up. I have unlimited time to train during that week, which we all know is not true. I think, Drew, you are right that doing rule of 3 as a team before, we all 3 did the event together. So we all had to ride the 100 miles. So Taylor here should definitely make sure that her 2 teammates their 2 teammates do a majority of the pulling first and foremost, since they will have this time off. I agree with Caitlin's input that it is a good time to, I would say, probably put your mind at ease and kind of accumulate as much volume as you can leading up to your trip. Do realize that your European vacation with jet lag and travel is probably not going to be as much of a, I would say, ideal recovery week as you might get if you were on a 2-week vacation at home.
She
or
doesn't
in the
say
States.
European, but I was thinking that too, because she just says outside the US and that she's going to do a bunch of walking. And so I just assumed.
Gotcha.
I assumed Europe too, because she's probably,
cycling podcast,
going to do all the sightseeing and whatever.
Only one thing that could be done in July that would force you to leave the US, and it's got to be the tour. So
maybe
I would say that Taylor should enjoy her time, or their time. Sorry, you said it was she, or either way.
Yeah, I don't know.
Taylor should enjoy their time outside of the country, and absorb the trip. Don't necessarily feel, I wouldn't say that an athlete would need to feel the obligation to train, because I think that can be not a slippery slope, but just puts a lot of stress on you if you feel like you have this obligation to be training, forces you to miss out on the experience. So I think if they can put together a plan to do, as Caitlin said, a lot of volume ahead of time, that way they can be focused on their vacation for 2 weeks, and then come back refreshed and ready to just kind of, I don't know, sharpen the knife a little bit more, or get things ready ahead of the event. I think that would probably be the best approach, in my opinion.
If she's got, I'm just gonna say she.
Taylor.
That is confusing. If she has like, a full 3 or 4 weeks before the event, then I think you could probably still get in another decently big week ahead of then. That's kind of the perfect timing to do a 3-week block with a 1-week taper going into the race. But I wouldn't even make the if you did a 3-week block, I'd be careful with the 3rd week. I'd probably make that a little bit of a lighter week as well. But the first 2 weeks, you could probably, still do some pretty big training. And then the last 2 weeks leading up to the event, start to dial it back some to taper for that event. That's what I would do if it was my A race. And then the other thing that I was going to mention is I like to run, and traveling with running shoes is easy. And running is the most convenient, and it's the closest thing to cycling in terms of maintaining aerobic fitness. You're not going to be able to run nearly as long as you can ride. Like they said that they're doing 10 to 15 hour weeks, and there's no way you're going to get close to that running. But if you sprinkled in a couple 30, depending on how accustomed you are to running, 30 to 60-minute runs throughout the week, that could help maintain some of that aerobic fitness. But that's all very dependent on how accustomed you are to it. Like if you've never ran, then don't start that week. But if it's something that you're interested in, you've got time from now, May to July, to start sprinkling in some 30-minute runs with your cycling training. And that's something that I did all spring, was sprinkle in. I was usually doing like 2 runs every week just to bulk up even more aerobic endurance, or like training at endurance throughout the week. But I also enjoy running, and it works with my schedule sometimes. So
you are going to put Taylor in a hole. You're like, do a big volume block, then introduce running on this kid.
no, don't introduce it. That's not what I'm saying.
Far as to make a point that there will be a lot of walking, then I don't think you need to introduce any more stress on the legs.
Yeah, I guess so. 2 weeks is a long time, though. I would want to maintain some aerobic fitness for 2 weeks. Over the course of 2 weeks, you're going to lose fitness for sure. But if you train a lot before and then you try to maintain some while you're there, then you'll exit that 2 weeks not so far behind as probably what you think,
And I will say that running is a great way to get around a city in the morning. Oh, yeah. I've done that on vacation before, just gone out for a 30-minute run and just kind of jogged around different neighborhoods while the city is still quiet, and just a cool way to see something and then go back, wake up your travel partner or whoever you're with, and then you got the rest of the day ahead of you to do whatever it is you need to do.
If it was only 1 week, I wouldn't even have suggested the running thing. But since it's 2 weeks, I'm like, personally, I would want to try to find a way to maintain some aerobic fitness.
Assuming that Taylor has done some running.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, next question. We got Mid-Pack Mac from Tennessee. I've been training and racing for several years, only using heart rate and RPE, but I'm now considering getting my first power meter. Can you offer some tips on transitioning from training and racing with heart rate and RPE only to training and racing with power? For a bit more context, I race cross-country marathon and gravel events. I'm a mid-pack finisher at best, meaning I attack the races as ITTs and rarely try to stay with a group. The majority of my events, typically 2 to 3 per year, take me somewhere between 5 and 8 hours, with one additional A race in August that takes 10 to 12 hours. Wow. But they're transitioning to using a power meter for the first time. So what advice can we give them? Mid-Pack Mac.
Well,
why ruin a good thing?
I feel least qualified to answer this, so of course I'll go first. I feel like a power test is in Mac's future to set some zones.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the easiest way. Also probably the worst way, if you don't like testing, to go and figure out what your power zones are. I'm sure there's a more nuanced approach, though, that you all could suggest. So
wait, tell me more. Why do you feel like you aren't qualified to answer this?
Well, I don't know, because I can't remember the time I didn't have a power meter on my bike. That's been that long. And I just go with my FTP that I set 8 years ago and just assume it's the same. So that's why.
Yeah. Every time I do an FTP test, it's always within the same 10 watt range. So I'm kind of over it. But yeah, this is good advice to do an FTP test right off. So, if they've never had a power meter, maybe they don't even know what a FTP test is. So just quick protocol here. An FTP test, you would go all out given the amount of time that it is. So it's a 20-minute test. So you have to pace yourself. And usually the way that I tell my athletes to pace themselves is and don't do this on your first ride with the power meter. Do a couple rides with the power meter. And if you're doing an endurance ride, still ride your endurance ride like you would with your RPE and heart rate, and then just keep an eye on the power to kind of see what it says. But don't ride based off the power. Continue riding based off of your normal ranges that you were with your heart rate, and then go out for this power test, and maybe you'll have an idea of like a number to shoot for. And I always tell my athletes to like shoot for a little less than that number for the first 10 minutes. And then if you feel good after 10 minutes, bump it up. And then for the last 5 minutes, you try to empty the tank. And what that prevents is like, and I've done this probably 50% of the time that I've done an FTP test is like I blow up like 13 minutes in. That's like my Achilles heel is 13 minutes in at the FTP test.
Olympic marathon. That's usually what I tell my athletes. Like, if you do this wrong by 13, 14 minutes, you're going to be hurting. And it's better for the first 5 minutes to go out conservatively.
Yeah.
The next 10 minutes is what you think you should be able to sustain. And the last 5 minutes is whatever you have left. And even if you're crawling across, that last 2 minutes at 100 watts, that's better than not finishing. It's better than failing it.
Yeah. I can't stand it when athletes like fail an FTP test, which, and to fail it doesn't, what I mean by fail is you just don't finish it.
Yeah.
If you finish it, you're not going to fail it. Like,
Yeah.
this isn't to prove anything. This is to get a number so that we can set your zones mainly. It is nice to see the number
baseline.
Yeah, it is nice to see the number go up, but the main, I mean, to me, the main reason to do a power test is to make sure your training zones are set so that when you go and do a threshold workout or a tempo workout or a VO2 workout, you've got a pretty good estimate of what those power zones should be given your FTP test. This whole like culture of like, bro, what's your FTP? And that being the like your sole identity as a cyclist is kind of silly. Because people with poor FTPs can still smash people with really good FTPs, and that's kind of like the beauty of cycling. But that would be the advice that, so all out 20-minute test, and then you take 95% of that 20-minute number. So I'm not going to do the math, but you've got a calculator on your phone.
Let's back up though. So it's an estimate, and FTP is your functional threshold power, theoretically what you should be able to sustain for an hour. And people, if you really want to get an accurate measurement, go out and do it for an hour.
You ever done that?
But that's just mean. Yeah.
I've done it once.
So then it became the 20-minute test. But often if you're just going out and doing an all-out 20-minute effort, that number is usually overinflated if you're taking 95% of that. So it was originally designed. Yeah, 100%. We talked about this already on the podcast.
I don't think mine is.
Weeks ago. We do a 5-minute all-out test, recover, and then the 20-minute test.
That is usually how I do mine. Yeah.
Still take 95% of that 20-minute number, but
because then you're at least a little fatigued going into it, which also will bring the number down a hair. Yeah. Okay. That is how I do. When you said it's inflated, I'm like, mine doesn't seem inflated, but I do. That's what I do with mine. So it's accurate.
You just like the number that comes out. That's why it's not inflated.
I don't like I want the number to, nobody likes their FTP. You could ask maybe Matt Beers. Matt Beers probably likes his FTP. On Alexi's podcast or something, or YouTube a couple weeks ago after Levi's Grand Fondo or whatever, Alexi asked Matt Beers what his 20-minute power number was, and he said 520. And then I went out that week and did my 30-30s workout and could barely do 520 for my 30-30s. And I'm like, what's wrong with this guy? Anyways, any other advice? I think so. We hit the power test and the FTP. What other transitioning to using a power meter? He says training and racing. So if there's racing advice too.
I mean, it's going to be pretty demoralizing coming back from your first few mountain bike rides after using a power meter, assuming he is putting it on his mountain bike. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
He putting it on a gravel bike.
Yeah. If he doesn't know what bike to put it on, I would tell him to put it on whatever bike he trains the most on.
Mm-hmm. But if you come back and you look at your average power over the course of a mountain bike ride, it's going to be pretty low. So, I mean, look at the normalized power. You can think of it as almost eliminating the time, the coasting, if that's a fair way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's how I always described it too. Yeah.
And there's going to be a big learning curve if you are trying to train with power and riding outside. So I would say if you are working with a coach and they give you workouts, well, I can't speak for, your coach's coaching philosophy, but in my opinion, it's normally about building time and zone. So if just say you have a 3x20 at tempo and the climbs available to you or the terrain around you is more suited to do, 10 or 15 minute, then I'm less worried about the structure and more worried about you getting the time. So if you can't take exactly 8 minutes of recovery or 10 minutes, whatever it may be, as long as you're getting time and zone, that is the most important thing. So if you want to go ahead.
No, I was going to say, just when Mac gets an FTP, it's all about durability. That's what it's about. Who cares about your FTP anymore? What's your durability, bro?
Yeah.
No, but I think, Drew, you mentioned something that I just wanted to highlight, which is don't go out day one, slap the power meter on whichever bike, Mac, and then go out and do an FTP test. Set yourself up for success for that test on a day when you're feeling good and you've got good sleep, proper nutrition, etc. But for the first, I would say probably a week or two, you guys think, just riding around and going by your heart rate and just seeing what that comes out to in power, and just
really wants to say hi.
just noting what that is, not prescribing any value to it, or then instantly going to Coggins, zone chart. Maybe I shouldn't even mention that for Mac, but not going to look at where you fall, but just saying like, okay, I did what I thought was a zone 2 ride, and this is what the power was. Interesting. Let's go on to the next day and do the same.
Yeah. Also, I did mention you put it on whatever bike that you train the most on. And if I were coaching Mac, I would make it to where he has to put it on his gravel bike, because that's going to be the best bike to put it on, because that's going to be the bike that's going to be the best. I would imagine that's going to be the best bike to do intervals on. Like, it's really hard to do a lot of types of intervals on the mountain bike, or at least on mountain bike trail. And so I don't know. I feel like
non-Flagstaff.
Really? You can do like straight up any kind of interval on trail?
Oh yeah. It's beautiful place.
Well, never mind. Well, the trail around here in Kentucky, and I'm assuming that the trail that's in Tennessee, which is probably very similar to here, it's really hard to do very structured workouts on trail, like cross-country trail. So I don't know. If I were coaching him, I would kind of push him towards putting it on his gravel bike, because that's going to be the bike that he's going to ride for 5 and 8 hours. And he says that event that's 10 to 12 hours. But maybe there's a case to be made for putting it on his mountain bike if those events are on his mountain bike. He doesn't say.
Just have fun with it too. It gives you a whole new way to experience riding, but don't let it dictate how you ride.
A new fantastic point of view.
That was something I was going to say, is like, don't, just because you're getting a power meter doesn't mean your heart rate and your RPE disappear. This is just coming alongside your heart rate and RPE. Like, I still use heart rate and RPE with my training. It's hard to do that with like my athletes because I can't see their RPE when they're doing workouts. But on every workout that I analyze for my athletes, I have their workout pulled up, and it has their power and overlaid with their power is their heart rate, because I don't want to just see the power that they're putting out. I want to see how hard they're having to work to put that power output out. And so usually what I'll do is I'll remind myself, okay, what's this athlete's max heart rate, so that I have some context. And then when I'm looking at their workout, I can look at their heart rate and be like, oh snap, they were only 2 beats off of their max. Like, something's wrong. Like, they were really going all out here. And they might have not left any comments in the in the box. And so that would be for me to like reach out to them and say, hey, how'd you feel on that workout? I noticed you were kind of maxed out and it was just a tempo workout. Like if that's happening, that's a big red flag. So
There's a lot of sprinting in this recovery ride here.
Yeah.
I do love that feature when I'm looking at files in Training Peaks of being able to see the zones mapped across the workout that's built and just kind of how that maps to where we anticipate these efforts to kind of lay and how athletes are responding. And you're right, Drew. I always talk to people and say, training is a Venn diagram, right? There's power, there's heart rate, and there's RPE. And in the middle of those three bubbles where they converge, that's where we're kind of looking at for each individual workout and making sure, like, is this mapping to the spirit of this particular workout, and trying to overlay those things. But maybe one day we'll have an RPE function that will be on your Garmin and ask you, what RPE is this?
I keep emailing Garmin to add that screen to them. I want to know, like when I'm doing my intervals, that I'm in the right RPE zone. It's a joke. That's a joke. It's not that funny of a joke, but what about racing with a power meter? Do you guys ever do you look at your power during a race? Do you intentionally not look at it in a race? Are there certain times when you look at it? I don't know. Do you set a target goal?
For marathon, mountain bike race, or gravel race, or I guess you could apply this to any discipline, but any race that has significant sustained climbing, whether it starts out with a big climb or, you have to have enough left in the tank to finish with a big climb, it's important to monitor your effort level. And again, whether that's heart rate or power, it's good to have outside of your RP, because that can get a little bit fuzzy in a race scenario. It's good to have something to look at.
Yeah, I've definitely had power meters on my various bikes. Although I recently just got one on my mountain bike, so I've never really raced too much with power for mountain biking. But I know that for cross, it was just not even worthwhile looking at the file, because it was such a stochastic effort where you're off your bike, you're sprinting, you're cornering, you're not pedaling for sections. It's not a good estimate. If I looked at just my power, it would say that, I only had 25 TSS for the day, but my heart rate was through the roof. So I know I went hard. But I try not to look at it for racing. I think if I were to look down and see over 300 watts for an extended period of time, I would probably just get in my own head. So for me, I like to just have it on a secondary screen and then just look at it afterwards and see what that looked like at that point in time. And turns out, usually because I've been training with power for so long, that when I thought that it was really just terrible, it was because I was going really hard. So
yeah, I think the way I use power in a race is more of to keep things in check, if I'm in a break or if I'm in a chase group where the effort is more sustained, but you could also go way too hard. And if it's a long race, you don't want to bury yourself in a chase group, knowing that there's 100 more miles or whatever, 50 more miles. And so I use it as a way to keep my efforts in check, to make sure I'm not not letting the adrenaline or the heat of the moment get the best of me. Which sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Another but even more than my power. So that's only in certain situations where I'll look at my power when things, if it's a smaller group, then it's a lot easier to look at your power. But if you're in a big peloton, I'm barely even looking at my computer because there's so much dynamic stuff going on that I don't want to take my eyes off of the road. But one thing I will even in a pack or when things get hard in a race, is I'll keep an eye on my heart rate even more than my power, because to me it seems like heart rate is a little bit more of an indicator of my effort at the given time in a race. So, and same thing, like if I look down and see my heart rate's a little bit like way higher than it should be for the first 20 minutes of a race, then I'm like, oh man, I need to back off, or hopefully the pace cools down or something. So yeah, that's my advice. But yeah, I don't get too hung up on the power from a race. I mean, everybody talks about their power numbers from races, but it's not something that I usually like am too focused
After
on
the
during
fact.
the race.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go back and analyze it after the race. Something that I like to do is do like an hour by hour comparison. Like I just did this in the video that I'm working on right now from BWR Cali. I do like an hour by hour analysis to see what my normalized from each hour is, so that I can see how poorly I paced the race. And I paced it like terribly. Like I burned all my matches in the first 2 hours, but and you can see
you try
that.
and keep things in check, Drew.
I know. You should you should see my heart rate. I was not looking at either one of them, I guess. But I got caught in the moment and thought I could hang, but I couldn't. So but like that's something that I can see from like looking at my power. It's like, oh snap, I hit basically the third. It was like 3.5 hours into the race. It was like big drop. I'm like, oh yep, that's where it happened. Anything else? This is like, we could just keep going and going on this one, but I think we gave him some pretty big ideas.
Yeah, I would say first race, probably don't even look at it. Look at it after the fact.
Yeah, just look at it after. Yeah.
And again, it depends on the kind of athlete you are. Like if you're going to be overly analytical in the moment, seeing the power numbers that you're doing, and that's going to get in your head, just like heart rate could potentially do the same. But it's not worth it. It really is. And I don't know if I made this clear when I was talking about setting specific power goals up a climb just to make sure you have enough in reserve or whatever. But it really is the most important thing to keep in check is how you feel during a race and ride off of that.
It is cool that once you've used a power meter for a while, like Tyler said, most of us have been using power meters for years and years. And so now when I think of a tempo interval, like I know exactly what my power numbers should be in the range for that workout, or any threshold VO2, any type of workout that you were to tell me, like right off the top of my head, I'm like, oh yeah, my power should be this, or at least my goal power should be this. And so once you get like more and more familiar with your power, it's kind of cool that you start to like, you just know where those zones are, and you can do workouts and all that just based off of those power zones. Cool. All right. One more.
Let's
do it.
Anthony from New Mexico. Hey, Ignition crew. He says he's been sitting at his desk. He sits at his desk all day. Or no, he's a former sit at his desk all day who's gotten into cycling as a way to get and stay healthy. I signed up for a long gravel race, has deadlines for my ADHD brain to keep myself from being lazy. I'm not trying to win anything. I'm just trying to show up to events and ride like I know what I'm doing. My question is, should my training look like my racing, which to me is basically tempo rides in zone 2? Or should I still be doing interval, so I'm assuming high intensity work, despite not really digging deep at all in these races? Training time is not a limitation for me, so I just wonder if I should just be on my bike as much as possible and not really structure my training, or what. Sounds like he's doing a long gravel race and he's wondering, so he's asking the question of like, should he keep doing the high intensity, or should he do more specific training for the event that he's signed up for?
I would say it depends. I would, you said Anthony was this person? Anthony. I would ask Anthony, what are your long-term goals? Because I think that, when we all coach athletes, when we're working with them, we're trying to understand not just what are the events in the next month or two that athletes are focused on, but what long-term are they looking to do? Is it, race at an elite level, or just complete your first century and building up to that. So I think that the two can be complementary. I think that you could, depending on how soon the race is, you could do perhaps more focused work. And if you have a lot of runway, then you could go through a proper cycle of, base, build, and then peaking for that event that you're training for. But at this point in time, I mean, how long is the event?
Doesn't say. He just says long gravel race. He's saying
Gotcha.
100 miles probably. That's what like most of them are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hey, I personally, when I'm working with athletes, to try to give an answer more than it depends, I like to make the intervals as race specific as possible. So if I have an athlete that's doing cross or XCO mountain biking, versus someone that's training for a gravel race, their intervals might look a little bit different compared to, versus one another. So it's not the case that everybody's training is the same, but, again, if it's a rolling hill gravel course, well, then doing something like a tempo sprint workout or something with surges in it is probably a good idea versus, in a cross or an XCO race where it's punch, recover. Those two, again, just varying the structure or the dosage of the intervals such that they meet the demands of the event. Because you can do threshold workouts a lot of different ways, turns out, and still get ready for your event.
Yeah, to piggyback off what Tyler was saying, I mean, it really depends on where you want to go. And it's one of those things where if you're still relatively new, what your sayings guide, Drew, what is the saying? Train your weakness, exploit your strength.
Why are you asking me? I'm terrible.
You're the quotes guy.
No. I love it when other people say quotes. I'm terrible at actually saying quotes. I always butcher quotes.
I think it's train your weaknesses, exploit your strengths, but usually the workout they don't really like doing, if that's extended time in threshold or long bouts of tempo, then maybe that's the one that you probably need to work on. And your event probably, I mean, you touch on every energy system in almost every race, so.
Yeah, man, I'm gonna sound like I'm just regurgitating what Dylan says, but I know what Dylan says in response to this. And I like what Dylan says in response to this question. Is there's two ways to think about this, and with really, really long gravel racing, these two things are at odds, and that's race specificity and periodization. So usually when we do periodized training, we start with tempo and you kind of work your way up to high intensity training when you're peaking. But at the same time, you also want your training to get more specific to the event that you're training for. And in the case of Unbound, the more specific training for Unbound would be really long blocks of tempo with maybe a little bit of high intensity mixed in. But like Unbound is basically like who can hold tempo for 10 hours or whatever. So do you do that, or do you do what periodization says and do high intensity towards the end of a training block? And he mixes them both. So he says that in a given week, you've got 2 intensity days, and he'll say that one of those workouts is general fitness, meaning he'll do high intensity and it won't be a really long workout. It would be like probably, something like a 30, like if you're really start like at the end of a training block, or the end of a training cycle, you're talking about like 30s or like sub 3 minute, really, really all out efforts. That's usually how I would end a training cycle as I'm leading up to like my A race. And then on the other day, the other intensity day, he would do a more race specific workout where it is a bunch of tempo and a really high TSS, and it's a longer workout. And he does those things kind of back to back leading up to the A race. And I don't think you can do that year round, because that's really, really hard to do, because like the really big tempo days are huge TSS days. So you're going to be tired from that, just the raw TSS being numbers so big. And then the other day when you're doing really high intensity, you're really whacking your your nervous system. So then that's hard to recover from. So you're doing two really hard workouts that are hard to recover from in different ways in the same week, not to mention all of the extra endurance you're doing on the days after that or following that. So it is really hard training. And so it's maybe not for everybody, but that's what he would say. And I think I follow in suit with that. I think I like Caitlin's approach sometimes, and you just said this last week, I think, where you like to just really hone in on one training zone, focus on that, build that time and zone, and then move on to the next thing. And I think typically I fall more into that. I don't like mixing too much, except for when it comes to like sprints and 1 minute bursts. I really do. I love sprinkling in like 15-second sprints into a tempo workout, or 1 minute VO2s into a tempo workout, just to like sprinkle in some intensity. So that's what I've been doing as like prep for Unbound or that's what I plan to do. I've only done one workout so far, where you do like tempo and I sprinkle in some high intensity. So yeah, that kind of says like both. He kind of asked which one, and I kind of just said both. But I think I would say for a less experienced rider, make those really big rides, like the race specific rides. You got to space those out quite a bit. Like that's maybe not something you can do every week. Maybe it's an every 2-week kind of thing. On like maybe it's on the weekends when you can do it. Like maybe try to do a workout that does replicate the race, because that's going to be, if you're talking about a long gravel race, that's going to be like it's going to be a long ride, like maybe 5 or 6 hours ride, and it's going to have probably a bunch of tempo kind of sprinkled into it. And so maybe only do that like every 2 weeks if you're not super, if you don't have a ton of durability. But then you can work your way up to doing those more and more often. But those are hard workouts to complete.
Did Anthony say, I forgot, did Anthony say how many years he's been riding? Or he said he's just...
Nah, he just said he used to be fat and sit at his desk all day, but he's gotten into cycling.
Nice. I think
he
sometimes...
doesn't give us any time
That's
zone
okay.
or timeline.
I think generally with athletes, I'm going to take the approach that he's newer to cycling, just because he called out the fact that he used to just kind of hang around, but it just got into it. I think a lot of times with newer athletes, I think the focus needs to be more on the macro view of something is better than nothing. And what I mean by that, or to maybe unpack that a little bit more, is that because you're so new to this particular modality, depending on what your previous athletic endeavors have been, a lot of times you're just going to respond to whatever sort of stimulus that you put on your body, or at least it seems that way. So doing more time in endurance, doing a little bit of tempo, a little bit of threshold, this, that, and the other, it's all going to be good for you, because I don't think you have the depth of history and knowledge to really worry too much about all of the things that you're doing. With that said, you need to make sure that you do them in the right dose and at the appropriate times, so that, Drew, like you're saying, you're not stacking 4 intensity days in a row on top of each other and then wondering why you can't train for a week because you're so tired or so fatigued. So I think, like you said, spacing those out. But, if you have a couple of workouts that you like and that are, tuned to the event that you're doing, sprinkle those in. And I would say the rest of the time, just more time in endurance zone as you build up to that big event.
I do think there is something special or even magical about a good 30-30s workout. Like last week, I was like, or the last couple of weeks, I've just been in like a training slump, like where every time I've tried to go do intervals, and I've been trying to do tempo, which shouldn't be like a super hard workout. I've just not been feeling very good doing tempo. And so last week, to get ready for BWR, I was going to do a tempo workout, and then something popped up on my schedule, and I only had like 90 minutes to ride. And I was like, well, I got to do some kind of intensity. So I just did a 4x10 minute 30-30s. And at the end of that workout, it was only a 90-minute ride, but I had knocked out like 4x10 30-30s. And by the end of that ride, I was like like pretty smoked and felt good. And then I felt really good at the race this weekend. And so I was like, man, I hadn't done a workout like that, what'd you say? Stochastic?
Stochastic,
I
yeah.
hadn't done a stochastic workout like that in months. And so I think there was something that kind of like switched on when I did that. And, so yeah, I plan to do a couple of sprinkle a couple of those 30-30s workouts similar to that before Unbound as well. I think I'm going to save those for like when I'm tapering, when I pull the volume back, I'll do some 30-30s to rev up that engine.
Caitlin, do you have any favorite workouts before a big event?
I want to first convey to Anthony is don't listen to all the noise. Drew's 30-30s.
I mean, listen to this podcast, but don't listen to
I've like mentioned like 10 different workouts.
It's so easy for, again, assuming he's a newer cyclist, to listen to all these podcasts and all these perspective and all these workouts that are working for specific athletes that might not necessarily work for you. And so don't lose the forest through the trees being the most important thing for you is going to be consistency. Checking the box of riding as frequently as you can. There's the old saying, don't take two off. So whether it's in pursuit of any goal, like you're trying to be better in your diet and you have a crummy day and you got some comfort food and whatever it was, we'll get back on the ball the next day. If you miss a day that you had planned to ride, it's okay. Ride the next day. Don't miss two. So consistency. And then again, this kind of speaks to my coaching philosophy, but choose the energy system you want to stress it and recover. So prioritize your recovery. And again, the stress being whatever riding you're doing, it's good. It's better than nothing. But as long as you're recovering well.
I'm glad you mentioned recovery. That's that's probably the number one most often overlooked thing with new racers.
And if you're not sleeping well and if you're not eating well to support the training that you're doing on the bike, then you're missing out on a lot.
Oh, I thought you were going to say if you're not sleeping well, then build a sauna because that'll help you sleep better.
Everything comes back to saunas on this podcast. I agree there on, and just sharing a personal anecdote. In my younger years, one thing I noticed, I had the fortune to ride with a pro cyclocross racer at the time, and I noticed that I would sit on her wheel while she was doing her intervals, and then I would want to keep going during the recovery between those intervals, and she would not stop, but just like come to a very, very slow pace. And it was in that moment that I realized, like, oh, the reason why this person is really fast is because they take their recovery just as seriously as they do their intervals. And that's something that stuck with me. And you're right to call it out, Caitlin, that a lot of times when we're working with new athletes, or when I'm working with a new athlete that has come from an app-based training plan or self-coaching, the comment that I get most often is, this training feels really easy. And it's like, well, yeah, if you're recovering right and you're able to show up and be consistent day to day, it shouldn't be the case that you're like, what Steve Magnus always says, going to see God every workout. We have to work on our aerobic base there. And there's a time for those workouts, those really hard efforts. But in moderation and at specific times. So be mindful of your recovery, Anthony, as you're building into this event.
I love the way this conversation is headed. We could talk more about this for hours, but bringing in the mental side of things and being able to have that restraint as somebody who wants to get better, that's super important. Not every workout should feel like a stretch. I've mentioned this a million times, but it's so good. In pursuit of a training goal, you should follow the rule of thirds, where a third of the work should feel really good, easily attainable. A third should just feel meh, kind of like you're going through the motions. And a third should feel super challenging. But if any point that ratio is out of check where everything feels too easy, then maybe you are sandbagging a little bit and you can step it up. Or if everything feels too hard, then you really need to dial it back.
Nice. Well, I think we fried that fish. I don't know if that's a saying, but I'm making it one.
I didn't answer Tyler's question about what was it? My favorite pre-event workout.
Yeah. Those that just give you comfort.
Comfort or fitness? I don't want comfort before my hay race. I want fitness.
You're not gaining fitness the day before your race. Is this like pre-race thing, or like this is like in weeks training leading up to the event?
Just like Drew was talking about, he went and did 30-30s, and like, yeah, you felt tired, Drew, but you also, I think, took a lot of confidence of like, okay, cool, like I did that. I did 40 minutes of 30-30s. Like, sweet. I feel really good. And that probably played into your, how you felt on the weekend too. So yeah, for Drew, maybe it's doing 30-30s
I would say
in the lead up to a race.
I think this kind of goes back to the, like you said, comfort, and my saying of train your weakness, exploit your strength. But I think like going back to what we are good at is what makes us feel good, and then there's that positive reinforcement. So for me, it's like doing a long single track climb and just feeling like fast up it, and like just feeling good up a long climb. Like it's just a good feeling, just best.
Yeah,
but I have science. I have science to back up my 30-30s, because in the Coggin Training and Racing with Power Meter book, there's that famous chart that shows you all the benefits that each training zone or each energy system accomplishes. And it talks about all like mitochondrial density and blah, 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 and aerobic. And it just has like this long list of physiological adaptations, and it breaks it up into recovery, endurance, tempo, whatever. And then all the way over on, I guess it would be anaerobic capacity, which is what 30-30s are. Every obviously like high power output and probably like buffering lactate have like 3 or 4 X's in those boxes, but every single box has an X. Whereas in every other training zone, so tempo, threshold, half the boxes are empty, meaning at least according to this chart, that those training zones don't help that specific physiological adaptation, but anaerobic capacity helps all of your different physiological adaptations. You should look up the chart. And so that's why I always go to that one, because I'm like, I'm improving everything right now. Whereas like when you do tempo, you're really just honing in on like muscular endurance or whatever the specific. Does that make sense?
Again, all of the energy systems support each other.
I'm just saying that's what the chart said.
Get him, Caitlin.
I'm gonna have to find this chart now.
Steven Seiler would say there's only one system, and it's the human system.
Oh yeah, he hates the talk about energy systems. He does.
You know what I would say to Taylor and Mac and Anthony is you should hire an ignition coach to help you explore your weakness and ignite your potential. Wow.
Dang. He just did an ad read. We should just drop it right there. We should have done that at the beginning.
They're just not recorded.
All right. I think we'll wrap it up there. Cool.
Sweet. Thanks
for coming on, Tyler. If you guys, and if you do want to sign up for coaching, to all those listeners out there, you can use promo code Matchbox100 to save $100 off your first month of coaching. And the way it works is you sign up, you fill out our athlete form. We get to know a little bit about you. I'm the one that reads those. So if you have complaints, send them on over to me. But I read those because I know all of our coaches pretty well. And then using the info that I read about you and your goals, I try to connect you to the best fit coach given those goals. That's how it works. And then you would jump on an intro call with that coach to see if it's a good fit. And then you're off to the races. Or first off to training and then to the races. Cool. That's all we got for this one. See you guys next week.
See ya.
Yeah.